Dramily.com, unlimited drama series.
My wife's perfume smelled different tonight. Not the usual vanilla and jasmine she'd worn for the past 5 years, but something sharper, more expensive. The kind of scent that screams, "I'm worth your attention," rather than, "I'm comfortable being married." Vanessa stumbled through our front door at midnight, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown timer. I sat in my leather chair, nursing a whiskey and pretending to read quarterly reports from the tech consulting firm where we both worked, where she was a vice president climbing the corporate ladder, and I was the guy who fixed everyone's computers and pretended not to notice the office politics swirling around me like toxic fog. "Hey, honey," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sorry I'm so late. The networking event ran longer than expected." Networking event, right. The same excuse she'd been using for the past 3 months, every Thursday night like clockwork. Her hair was mussed, lipstick smudged, and there was a wrinkle in her blouse that suggested she'd been doing more than shaking hands and exchanging business cards. "How was it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. After 15 years in IT, I'd learned that the best way to gather information was to stay quiet and let people hang themselves with their own words. "Oh, boring corporate stuff. Talked to some potential clients, had a few drinks." She kicked off her heels and padded toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted, going to bed." But she'd forgotten her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a text notification, and I caught just enough of the preview to make my stomach clench. Tonight was everything. Same time next week, meanest G. Gareth Walsh, our CEO. The man who'd hired me 6 years ago and barely acknowledged my existence since. The man who'd promoted Vanessa twice in the last year, while I remained stuck in the same cubicle, watching her rise through the ranks with what I'd assumed was pure talent and determination. I stared at that phone for a long time, whiskey burning in my throat, pieces clicking together like a puzzle I'd been too naive to see. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she'd started working out and buying lingerie she never wore around me, the way Gareth looked at her during company meetings, and how she always seemed to know about executive decisions before they were announced. My name is Elliot Marks, and I just discovered my wife was having an affair with our boss. But instead of rage, I felt something colder, more calculating, something that reminded me of my blue-collar father, who used to say that the best revenge was served with a smile and a plan. The next morning, Vanessa was in the shower when I decided to do something that would change everything. Her purse sat open on the dresser, and there, tucked behind her wallet, was a phone I'd never seen before. A cheap burner phone that had no business being in the designer handbag of a corporate executive. I powered it on, heart hammering as I scrolled through messages that painted a picture I wished I could unsee. Hotel confirmations, photos of Vanessa in Gareth's office after hours, her blouse unbuttoned, laughing at something off camera. A video timestamp from last Tuesday night that made me realize she hadn't been visiting her sister like she'd claimed. The messages went back months, intimate details about their encounters, complaints about me, discussions about my career that made my skin crawl. Vanessa had been feeding Gareth information about my work, my ambitions, even my ideas for improving company efficiency. Ideas that Gareth had later presented to the board as his own innovations. "Nothing says career growth like horizontal advancement," I muttered, screenshotting everything before carefully placing the phone back where I'd found it. My own phone buzzed. A text from Mick, my old college roommate who now tended bar at the Red Mile, a dive bar downtown where the security cameras caught everything and the owner didn't ask questions about what happened in his establishment. "Bro, you need to see this. Your wife's on the security cam with her boss. You coming or what?" I poured myself a whiskey at 10 in the morning, something I'd never done in my life. But then again, I'd never planned to systematically destroy two people's careers before either. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about the lies, the manipulation, the way they'd both treated me like I was invisible while they built their relationship on the foundation of my humiliation. I texted Mick back, "On my way. And Mick, this is war." The Red Mile smelled like stale beer and broken dreams, exactly the kind of place where middle management went to complain about their lives and pretend they were still young. Mick had been working there for 3 years, ever since his marketing career imploded, and he'd developed a talent for collecting information that would make a private investigator jealous. "You're not going to like this," he said, sliding a tablet across the sticky bar top. The security footage was grainy but clear enough. Vanessa and Gareth in a corner booth last Thursday, her hand on his thigh, his fingers tracing patterns on her wrist. They looked comfortable together, familiar, like they'd been doing this for longer than I'd suspected. "She's got more hands-on experience than me," Mick joked, then caught my expression. "Sorry, man. Bad timing for humor." "No, keep it coming. I'm going to need all the laughs I can get." I studied the footage, noting timestamps, angles, the way they leaned into each other like teenagers. "Can you make copies of this?" "Already done." "But what's your play here? You going to confront them? Get a lawyer?" I shook my head. "No lawyers, no weeping. I'm going to burn this to the ground, but I'm going to do it smart." The plan started forming as I watched my wife lie to my face on that tiny screen. Gareth was hosting a company party next Friday night, one of those mandatory fun events where executives pretended to care about employee morale while networking with potential clients. Vanessa would be there, playing the perfect corporate wife while her husband sat at home like an idiot. Except this time, her husband wouldn't be sitting at home. Friday night arrived with the kind of autumn chill that made people grateful for indoor heating and open bars. The party was held in our company's downtown headquarters, 30 floors of glass and steel that screamed success to anyone driving past. I'd helped set up the audio-visual equipment earlier that week, which gave me access to the building and knowledge of every camera, every blind spot, every executive office that would be empty during the festivities. I arrived at 8, dressed in my best suit and carrying a laptop bag that contained everything I'd need for what I had planned. The security guard, Dave, knew me well enough to wave me through without checking my credentials. "Working late again, Eli? You know how it is. The show must go on." The party was in full swing on the 20th floor, but I took the elevator to 30, where the executive offices lived in climate-controlled luxury. Gareth's corner office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who made 10 times my salary. Leather furniture, expensive artwork, and a view of the city that probably cost more per square foot than my entire condo. I'd planned to plant a recording device and leave, maybe gather some evidence of their after-party activities. What I hadn't planned was to find them already there. Vanessa perched on Gareth's desk while he stood between her legs, both of them breathing hard and disheveled. They froze when I walked in. Vanessa's face went white, her hands flying to button her blouse. Gareth straightened his tie, trying to look authoritative despite the lipstick on his collar. "Elliot," he said, voice steady but eyes calculating. "What are you doing here?" I could have yelled, could have made a scene, demanded explanations, played the part of the betrayed husband. Instead, I smiled and set my phone on his desk, camera facing them, recording light blinking red. "Hey, Gareth, you might want to fix your tie. Board meeting's in 10 minutes. It was a lie, but they didn't know that. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them scrambling to figure out how much I'd seen, how much I knew, what I planned to do with the information. "Elliot, wait," Vanessa called, but I was already at the elevator, pressing the button with hands that weren't shaking, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The elevator doors opened, and Clara Jensen stepped out. Vanessa's best friend at the office, the HR director who specialized in making problems disappear and keeping executives happy. She took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, grabbing my arm as I stepped into the elevator. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I looked at her manicured fingers on my sleeve, then met her eyes with the coldest stare I could manage. "That's what I'm counting on." The elevator doors closed on her shocked expression, and I rode down to the party with my phone full of evidence and a plan that was just getting started. By Monday morning, everyone in the building would know exactly who they were dealing with, and it wouldn't be the invisible IT guy they'd been ignoring for 6 years. Monday morning brought the kind of nervous energy that made coffee shops rich and antacid manufacturers wealthy. I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by computer monitors and the gentle hum of servers, watching the executive floor through security cameras I'd accessed with my administrative privileges. Gareth arrived at 7:30, earlier than usual, his face grim as he strode through the halls like a man preparing for battle. Vanessa came in 20 minutes later, her usual confident stride replaced by something more cautious, more aware of the eyes following her movement. They thought they were dealing with a wounded husband who might cause a scene or file for divorce. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd spent 6 years learning every digital secret their company possessed, every vulnerability in their carefully constructed professional lives. The anonymous email I'd sent to the board of directors at 5 a.m. was simple and professional. I believe you should be aware of a relationship between CEO Gareth Walsh and VP Vanessa Marks that may constitute a conflict of interest and potential liability for the company. Attached are time-stamped photographs taken in Mr. Walsh's office during company hours. The photos weren't explicit, but they were damning. Vanessa on Gareth's desk, his hands on her waist, both of them in a state of undress that clearly indicated activities unrelated to quarterly reports or budget meetings. I'd been careful to crop out anything that might identify me as the photographer, and the metadata had been scrubbed clean. By 9 a.m., Gareth's assistant was fielding calls from board members. By 10, Clara Jensen was making rounds to various departments, asking casual questions about employee satisfaction and workplace relationships. By 11, Vanessa was in Gareth's office with the door closed, their voices raised enough that his assistant kept glancing nervously at the frosted glass. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room and found myself standing next to Tom Bradley from accounting, a guy who'd worked here longer than anyone and had opinions about everything. "Heard there's drama upstairs," he said, stirring sugar into his cup with the enthusiasm of someone who lived for office gossip. "Something about inappropriate relationships and emergency board meetings." "Really?" I kept my voice neutral, interested but not too interested. "Any idea what's going on?" "Word is someone's been playing where they shouldn't, if you know what I mean. And now the board's asking questions about company policies and liability issues." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I always wondered about Walsh and some of the women around here. Guy's got wandering eyes and too much power for his own good." That afternoon, I received a call from David Lynn, one of the board members I'd met during a system upgrade last year. He was the kind of man who asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers, which made him unusual in corporate leadership. "Elliot, I wonder if you could spare some time to discuss our IT security protocols, specifically our policies regarding executive access to company systems and data." "Of course, Mr. Lynn. When would be convenient?" "How about now? Conference room B on the 25th floor." David Lynn was waiting with a cup of tea and a folder that looked suspiciously thick for a discussion about IT protocols. He was a careful man, the kind who'd built his fortune by asking the right questions and listening to uncomfortable answers. "I received some concerning information this morning," he said without preamble. "Information that suggests possible misuse of company resources and violations of our workplace conduct policies." I nodded, keeping my expression professionally neutral. "I see. The thing is, these allegations could be very damaging if they're true, but they could also be fabricated by someone with a grudge or access to photo editing software." He opened the folder and slid the printed emails across the table. "I'm hoping someone with your technical expertise might help us determine the authenticity of these materials." It was a clever approach. He couldn't directly ask me if I was the whistleblower, but he could ask me to verify the evidence I'd provided. I examined the photos with the careful attention of an IT professional, noting timestamps, image quality, and technical details that would be difficult to fake. "These appear genuine," I said finally. "The metadata is consistent, the lighting matches the office environment, and there are no obvious signs of digital manipulation." "And in your professional opinion, could these have been taken by someone with legitimate access to the executive floor?" "Absolutely. Anyone with building access and basic knowledge of our security systems could have captured these images." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "The question isn't whether they're real, Mr. Lynn. The question is what the board intends to do about them." He closed the folder and studied my face with the intensity of a man who'd spent decades reading people for a living. "What would you do, Elliot, if you discovered that executives were using company resources for personal relationships, potentially creating liability issues, and undermining workplace morale?" "I'd remember that this company's success depends on trust, Mr. Lynn. Trust between employees and management. Trust between the board and leadership. Trust that everyone is held to the same standards, regardless of their position." I met his gaze steadily, and I'd act accordingly. That evening, I sat in my car in the company parking garage, waiting. Gareth's silver BMW was still in its reserved spot, 3 levels up, and I knew from experience that he rarely left before 7 p.m. The garage was mostly empty, security cameras focused on entrances and exits rather than individual parking spaces. I didn't have to wait long. Gareth's footsteps echoed off concrete walls as he approached his car, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with frustration. I don't care what the board thinks they know. This is a witch hunt, and I won't stand for it. He paused, listening. No, I don't think it's coincidence. Someone's playing games, and I have a pretty good idea who. He ended the call and looked up to find me leaning against his car, arms crossed, expression calm. Evening, Gareth. Rough day at the office? His face hardened. You've got some nerve showing up here after the stunt you pulled. Stunt? I'm not sure what you mean. I pushed off from his car, hands in my pockets, posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between us. I'm just a guy who fixes computers and minds his own business. Cut the innocent act. We both know you sent those photos to the board. I shrugged. Prove it. He stepped closer, trying to use his height and executive presence to intimidate me. It might have worked 6 months ago, before I'd learned exactly how much power came from having nothing left to lose. You want to keep your job? You'll back off.
I saw her get in. I saw everything.
Let me explain.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
There are things you don't understand, bigger picture considerations that you're not even the best boss my wife's had, I interrupted, enjoying the way his face flushed with anger. Although I'll give you points for creativity. Using company resources for your personal entertainment shows real leadership initiative. He shoved me, hard enough to make me stumble back against the concrete pillar. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for. That's assault, Gareth, in a parking garage with security cameras. I straightened my jacket, still smiling. But I'm feeling generous tonight, so I'll let it slide, this time. As he fumbled for his keys, I pulled out my car key and dragged it along the side of his BMW, leaving a long scratch in the pristine paint. The sound echoed through the garage like fingernails on a chalkboard. Next time, use Uber, I said, walking away, as he stood there sputtering with rage. The war had officially begun, and I was just getting started. The next morning brought news that Gareth had called in sick, something that hadn't happened in the 5 years I'd worked under his leadership. Vanessa, meanwhile, arrived at the office looking like she'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, her usual polished appearance replaced by dark circles and nervous energy. I spent the morning doing what I did best, being invisible while gathering information. The company's digital infrastructure was an open book to someone with my access level, and I'd been reading between the lines for weeks. Expense reports that didn't quite add up. Hotel charges on the corporate card that coincided with Vanessa's business trips. Consulting fees paid to companies that existed only on paper. Mick met me for lunch at a diner downtown, sliding into the booth across from me with the satisfied expression of someone who'd spent his morning productively. Your boy Gareth's been busy, he said, pulling out his phone. Remember how you asked me to check with my contacts in the hospitality industry? I nodded. Mick had worked in hotel management before his bartending career, and he still had friends who were willing to share information about interesting guests. Turns out your CEO's been a regular at the Grandview Hotel for months. Always the same suite, always paid for with company funds, always with the same guest. He showed me photos from the hotel's social media accounts. Charity events, business gatherings, and in the background of one shot, Gareth and Vanessa at a corner table, her hand on his arm. But here's the interesting part, Mick continued. The hotel keeps records of all corporate bookings for tax purposes. Your wife's been signing off on these expenses as legitimate business meetings, even though the room service orders suggest they weren't doing much talking. Room service orders. Champagne, strawberries, late-night meals for two. The kind of stuff that screams romance, not quarterly reviews. He leaned back, grinning. And the best part? It's all documented. Timestamps, signatures, credit card receipts. I studied the information, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't just an affair. It was systematic misuse of company funds, with Vanessa's signature on documents that could be traced back to her approval. There's more, Mick said. I did some digging into Gareth's background. Guy's got a pattern. This isn't his first workplace relationship, and it's not his first time mixing business with pleasure on the company dime. That afternoon, I crafted another anonymous email to the board, this one focused on financial irregularities rather than personal relationships. I attached hotel receipts, expense reports, and a detailed timeline showing how company funds had been diverted for personal use. I was careful to present it as a concerned employee's observation rather than a targeted attack, but the implications were clear. By Thursday, the whispers had become conversations. Clara Jensen was working overtime to manage the situation, scheduling meetings with department heads and reminding everyone about confidentiality agreements. But corporate secrets were like water. They always found a way to leak. I was updating server software when my desk phone rang. Gareth's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. My office. Now. The executive elevator seemed to move slower than usual as I rode up to the 30th floor. Gareth was waiting behind his desk, hands folded, expression cold. Vanessa sat in one of the leather chairs, her face pale but determined. Sit down, Elliot. I remained standing. I'm fine here. This has gone far enough, Vanessa said, her voice shaking slightly. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you're accomplishing, you need to stop. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I replied, keeping my tone professional. I'm just doing my job, maintaining network security and ensuring compliance with company policies. Gareth stood up, his composure finally cracking. Don't play games with me. We know you're behind the emails to the board. We know you've been gathering information and spreading rumors. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I don't need proof. I'm the CEO of this company, and I'm telling you to back off before you do something you'll regret. I looked at Vanessa, studying her face, noting the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Is that a threat, Gareth? It's a warning. There are things you don't understand about corporate politics, relationships that go beyond what you see on the surface. He moved around the desk, trying to project authority. You're a good employee, Elliot. You've got skills, potential. Don't throw it all away over a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Vanessa finally spoke up. Gareth and I have been working closely on several projects. Sometimes that requires late meetings, travel, collaboration that might look inappropriate to someone who doesn't understand the full context. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind that might satisfy a suspicious spouse or deflect casual gossip. Unfortunately for them, I had evidence that went far beyond suspicious circumstances. I see, I said. So the hotel receipts, the personal charges on company cards, the private meetings in locked offices, that's all just business? The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Gareth's face had gone red, while Vanessa looked like she might be sick. You've been spying on us, she whispered. I've been doing my job. Network security includes monitoring for misuse of company resources and potential security breaches. I smiled coldly. And I've found several. My phone buzzed with a text message. David Lynn. Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your presence is requested. I showed them the screen. Looks like the board wants to discuss network security. I should probably prepare a comprehensive report. As I walked toward the door, Gareth called after me. This isn't over, Elliot. I turned back, meeting his gaze with steady confidence. You're absolutely right. It's just getting started. O'Quainin. The elevator doors closed on their shocked faces, and I rode down to my cubicle with the satisfaction of a man who just played his hand perfectly. Tomorrow's board meeting would be interesting, but tonight I had one more card to play. Woman bet. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but I arrived at 8 to prepare my presentation. The conference room on the 31st floor was all glass and polished wood, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. David Lynn was already there, along with 3 other board members I recognized but rarely interacted with. Thank you for coming, Elliot, David said, gesturing to a chair at the long table. We've reviewed your reports, and we have some questions about the security concerns you've identified. Margaret Foster, the board's longest-serving member, leaned forward with the sharp attention of someone who'd built her fortune by asking uncomfortable questions. These financial irregularities you've documented, how long have they been occurring? I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. Based on the data I've analyzed, approximately 8 months. The pattern suggests systematic misuse rather than isolated incidents. The presentation I'd prepared was thorough and professional, laying out a timeline of suspicious transactions, policy violations, and security breaches, hotel charges that coincided with personal travel, consulting fees paid to shell companies, meeting rooms booked for private conversations during off hours. And you discovered this how? Asked Robert Chen, the board's financial oversight specialist. Routine security audits flagged unusual patterns in executive spending. When I investigated further, I found documentation that raised concerns about compliance with company policies. It was technically true, though I omitted the part about my personal motivation for conducting those audits. The board didn't need to know about my marriage problems. They needed to know about the company's liability issues. David Lynn studied the financial reports with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. These expenses, they were all approved by VP Vanessa Marks? Yes, sir. Her electronic signature is on all the relevant documents. And she would have known these were personal rather than business expenses? I paused, choosing my words carefully. The nature of the charges and the circumstances suggest that anyone reviewing them would have questions about their business justification. The door opened, and Gareth walked in with Vanessa close behind. They looked like they'd spent the morning preparing for battle. Professional attire, confident postures, ready to present their side of the story. "I'm sorry we're late," Gareth said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "We were reviewing some materials that might be relevant to this discussion." Margaret Foster didn't look impressed by the dramatic entrance. "Mr. Walsh, we're discussing some concerning financial irregularities that have come to our attention." "I'm aware of the allegations," Gareth replied smoothly, "and I want to address them directly. What you're seeing is the result of a disgruntled employee with access to confidential information and a personal grudge." He looked directly at me as he spoke, his meaning clear to everyone in the room. "Elliot Marks has been conducting unauthorized surveillance of company executives, gathering information for personal use and presenting it in a misleading context." Vanessa opened a folder and slid documents across the table. "We have evidence that he's been accessing systems beyond his authorization level and using company resources to spy on employees. It was a clever counterattack, turning my investigation into evidence of my own misconduct. If I'd been a different kind of person, it might have worked." "That's an interesting theory," I said, standing up and walking to the presentation screen. "But it doesn't explain this." I clicked to the next slide, a recording of Gareth's voice from his office phone system, discussing the need to handle the Elliot situation and ensure that certain expenses don't get additional scrutiny. The conversation had been automatically recorded by the company's compliance system, something Gareth had apparently forgotten when he'd made calls from his office line. "Company policy requires recording of all executive communications for regulatory compliance," I explained as Gareth's face went white. "This conversation took place yesterday afternoon." The recording continued, with Vanessa's voice joining the discussion. They talked about covering up expenses, managing board perceptions, and ensuring that their working relationship didn't become a liability for the company. "This is taken out of context," Vanessa protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," David Lynn said quietly, "but combined with the financial documentation and the timeline of events, it paints a concerning picture." Robert Chen was studying his copy of the expense reports with growing displeasure. "These hotel charges alone represent a significant misuse of company funds. And if they were approved despite their obvious personal nature, we need to discuss this privately," Margaret Foster announced, looking at Gareth and Vanessa. "Please wait outside while the board deliberates." As they filed out, Gareth caught my arm. "You think you're clever, but you have no idea what you've just done. There are consequences to declaring war on people with power." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then met his eyes with calm confidence. "I guess we'll find out." The board deliberation lasted 45 minutes. When they called everyone back in, Margaret Foster's expression was grim. "After reviewing all the evidence, the board has reached some difficult decisions. Mr. Walsh, we're accepting your resignation effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Gareth's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't do this. I've built this company, increased profits every quarter, delivered results that you've also violated company policies, misused corporate funds, and created potential liability issues that could have serious consequences." David Lynn's voice was steady but final. "The decision is made." Vanessa looked like she might faint. "What about me?" "Miss Marks, your role in approving these expenses makes your position untenable. We're prepared to accept your resignation and provide a standard reference, but your employment here is terminated." As security arrived to escort them out, Gareth turned back to me one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." The conference room fell silent after they left. Margaret Foster gathered her papers with the efficient movements of someone who'd handled corporate crises before. "Mr. Marks," she said, "the board appreciates your diligence in bringing these issues to our attention. We'll be conducting a full audit of our expense policies and implementing additional oversight measures." David Lynn remained after the other board members left. "That was expertly handled, Elliot. You presented the facts clearly and let them speak for themselves." "I just did my job, Mr. Lynn." "Yes, you did. And that's exactly why the board would like to offer you a promotion. We need someone in executive leadership who understands the importance of integrity and accountability. I looked out the conference room window at the city below, thinking about the past week, the choices I'd made, and the price of justice. What kind of position? Chief Technology Officer. Gareth's replacement will need someone he can trust to handle the technical side of operations, and your performance this week demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment we value. It was more than I dared to hope for when this started. Not just revenge, but advancement. Not just justice, but opportunity. I accept. As I walked back to my cubicle to pack up my personal items, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: satisfaction. Not the hollow victory of destroying someone else's life, but the solid confidence that came from standing up for principles and being rewarded for it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mick. Heard through the grapevine that there's been some excitement at your office. Drinks tonight to celebrate? I typed back, absolutely, but we're drinking the good stuff tonight. The corner office that had belonged to Gareth Walsh was being cleaned out by security. But by next week, it would house someone who understood that real power came from competence, integrity, and the patience to wait for the right moment to act. I'd started this week as an invisible IT guy, with a cheating wife and a dead-end job. I was ending it as a corporate executive with a clear conscience and a future that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the best revenge was simply being better than the people who'd underestimated you. Stwari no. 2-0, 2-5. I didn't know. 12-25. 32.